Today we're going to be focusing on the Gunpowder Empires. These are the empires that were expanding in Europe and Asia in the 1400s to 1600s approximately, and they included the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Safavid Empire. So we're going to go through each of them and discuss them a little more. So your goal here should be to understand the achievements of the Gunpowder Empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Essentially, what did they accomplish and how were they able to accomplish it? From the 1300s to the 1700s, the three gunpowder empires that dominated Europe, Africa, and Asia were the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. And we're going to talk about each one separately. All three empires were unique, but they showed some similarities. So, first, let's talk about how they were similar. All three empires were able to conquer their neighboring people because they formed strong armies using rifles and artillery. That's where you get the term gunpowder empires. All three empires were also Islamic and ruled by Muslim leaders who were well organized and had governments made up of loyal bureaucrats. All three empires also blended their culture with their neighboring societies to create a high point of Islamic culture. So, unlike some other European countries during this time period, these empires, while they did prefer Islam, they allowed for a lot more freedom than you might have seen in places in Europe where Catholicism was the main religion and they persecuted people who weren't Catholics. So, little different. So, to start with, we're going to be talking about the Ottoman Empire. Around 1300, Muslim Turks of Anatolia were unified and formed the Ottoman Empire. You can kind of see the beginnings of it right here. The Ottomans used muskets and cannons to form a powerful army, and then they expanded their territory. The Ottoman army included about 30,000 elite soldiers called janissaries who were slaves that were trained to be loyal to the government. A lot of the janissaries were also Christians who had been converted and then given a position in the army. Now, this conversion was forced. Janissary, while they were forced to convert to Islam, were oftentimes treated better under the Ottoman rule than they had been under Christian rulers, and they were actually able to move up in society. Janissaries were well trained military men who usually led the battle, but oftentimes they also shared in whatever spoils or booty came from the victory. So Janissaries could become rather wealthy. And so they were very loyal to the Sultan and the government that they were supporting. In 1453, the Ottomans attacked Constantinople and conquered the Byzantine Empire, which made it very strong because it controlled access from Asia and the Black Sea area into the Mediterranean Sea. So conquering Constantinople was a very powerful geographic position to be in. In the late 1600s, or by the late 1600s, the Ottomans expanded into the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. And you can see this is at the height of their empire. They controlled all of this golden area. So, very important. And in fact, this was one of the reasons that Europe started to look for and sent Columbus to the west to try to find a new way to get to Asia because they didn't like having to deal with the Ottoman Empire. Because if you go east, you're going to run into the Ottoman Empire unless you go all the way around Africa, which takes way too long. So, just like we here at Santana are called the sultans, Ottoman rulers were called the sultans, and they governed with absolute power. So, very similar to Europeans' experience with their leaders during this time period where you're starting to deal with absolute leaders. The greatest Ottoman sultan was Suleiman the Magnificent, who came to power in 1520. So these leaders actually became absolutists oftentimes a little earlier than you'll see it in Europe. Remember, in Europe they had feudalism, and then they will slowly lead to absolutist rulers, but the Ottoman Empire had absolute rulers sooner. Under Suleiman, Ottoman armies attacked Eastern Europe, and the empire reached its height and most power. And by the mid 1500s, Suleiman was the most powerful king in the world, as you can see again by the amount of territory that he controlled. Suleiman's greatest accomplishment was creating a stable government for his empire. He was known as the lawgiver because he created law codes that govern criminal and civil issues. And he tried to simplify and make the tax system more fair to raise money for his empire, obviously, because there was a lot of territory to control. And he granted freedom of worship to Christians and Jews living in his empire. Also, under his reign, art, architecture, and poetry flourished, so they had somewhat of a renaissance, or they would call this the Golden Age. You can see some of the paintings here and the mosque that was created by Suleiman's architect, Sinan. So the Ottoman Empire will not last forever, but it will definitely last quite a while. It will slowly start to diminish and lose territory. And by 1914, it almost is only in the area of what would be modern-day Turkey. So it's in this area right here is what you have left. And after World War I, the Ottoman Empire will be no more. But one of the main reasons for its decline was the rivalry among the leaders. So sultans, fearing losing power, would have their brothers executed or they'd jail their sons. And what eventually happened is, instead of strengthening leaders coming after you, they killed the people that they thought were threatening their power. And it led to, every time a sultan died, weaker and weaker sultans would come to power, who had less understanding and had not been trained in the art of ruling and government. And the result was that the power and the leadership weakened, and then the country weakened. Now we're going to move over to the Safavids. So unlike the Ottomans, who we just learned about, who were Sunni Muslims, which is a certain sect of Islam, the Safavids believed in something called Shia Islam. And when they took over an area, they strictly converted the people they conquered. So there was not that freedom of religion. So the Safavids were Turks living in Persia, which is to the east of the Ottoman Empire, like modern-day Iran, who built a powerful gunpowder army and created an empire in modern-day Iran. So the Safavid rulers were called Shahs, using the Persian title for king. The greatest ruler in the Safavid Empire was Shah Abbas, who came to power in 1587. Abbas borrowed ideas from outside groups to improve the Safavid Empire. He modeled Ottoman janissaries, using merit, and employed government workers, and introduced religious toleration, which helped Safavids trade with European Christians. Art would flourish during this time period, just like it was with the Ottoman Empire, especially carpets. They were well known for the art of creating carpets that blended both Persian and European designs, and these were much sought after throughout the European world as well as the Middle Eastern world. So again, this ruler, Shah Abbas, he actually modeled himself after the more lenient Ottoman Empire that allowed for more religious freedom. But prior to him, it was stricter. And then after him, it's going to become strict as well. So the Safavid Empire is going to decline much sooner than the Ottoman Empire. But like the Ottomans, Shah Abbas blinded or killed most of his capable sons in order to keep his power. As a result, you're going to have weak leaders. That's going to lead to the rapid decline of the Safavid Empire. While the Ottoman Empire will last until 1922, or just after World War I, the Safavid Empire fell in 1747. All right, and the last Gunpowder Empire that we're going to talk about is the Mughals, who were Muslim and descended from Turks, Afghans, and Mongols, and they lived in Central Asia. And like the Ottomans and the Safavids, the Mughals built a powerful army with guns and cannons. Again, why they're called one of the Gunpowder Empires. In 1494, Babur became king of the Mughals, expanding the army, and began invasions into India to create his empire. So you're going to see this empire kind of in India and to the north of India. So in 1556, Babur's grandson Akbar became king of the Mughal Empire and expanded the empire into almost all of India. Akbar was the greatest of the Mughal rulers. His greatest achievement was attempting to blend the different cultures of the area and to allow for religious toleration. He held religious discussions with Hindus and Muslim scholars. He ended the tax that non-Muslims were required to pay and created a fairer and affordable tax system. Because he was Muslim, ruling in a largely Hindu region, Akbar allowed non-Muslims to worship freely. He married many wives, among them were Muslims, Hindu, and Christian women. And if you want to know how many is many, he had 6 wives. The best example of Akbar's tolerance was his creation of a new religion called the Divine Faith, with an example of syncretism because it blended ideas from Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. Akbar hoped the Divine Faith would end conflicts between Muslims and Hindus, but the Divine Faith never attracted many Muslims or Hindus. And so when Akbar died, so did the Divine Faith. Consistent with the other two, consistent with the Safavids and the Ottomans, during Akbar's reign, art flourished as well, and this is some of the Mughal artists who were known for their very colorful paintings called miniatures. Mughal architecture was known for blending Hindu and Islamic designs. The greatest example of Mughal architecture is the Taj Mahal, which was built in 1631 by Shah Jahan. The Mughal Empire will decline. It grew weak in the 1700s as kings spent far too much money on their palaces and on war. In addition, the large population of Hindus in India began to revolt against their Muslim rulers. And then the biggest thing that led to the Mughal Empire's decline was that Great Britain took advantage of the weaknesses and conquered India and removed the last Mughal emperor from power in 1858. The Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals built very large Islamic empires using gunpowder militaries. These empires provided new contributions in law, art, and religion, but their decline by the 1800s allowed newly industrialized European nations to dominate and take over much of the region.